It says it's streaming.
Good evening, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. We open our service as the choir leads us in an opening song on page 329, Shomer Yisrael.
As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we by our lives give light to all who behold us. As the brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who kindled light, so may we in our own day be among those who kindle light. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the light of Shabbat.
So we embrace Shabbat, day of rest, day of wonder, day of peace. Bottom page 10, Shabbat. Adonai skip like a calf, Syrian like the young ox. Kol Adonai Chotzev HaBotesh, the voice of Adonai kindles flames of fire. The voice of Adonai convulses the wilderness, Adonai convulses the wilderness of Kadesh. The voice of Adonai causes hinds to calve and strips forests bare, while in God's temple all say glory. Adonai sat enthroned at the flood, Adonai sits enthroned, sovereign forever. May Adonai grant strength to God's people, may Adonai bestow on God's people well-being. Adonai hoz le'amoni, ten Adonai yoreh, et on l'ashlayim. Look out there, on the next page. Shabbat, and Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. Coming upon a certain place, he passed the night there, for the sun was setting. Taking one of the stones of the place, he made it his headrest as he lay down in that place. He dreamed, and lo, a ladder was set on the ground with its top reaching to heaven. And lo, angels of God going up and coming down on it. And lo, Adonai stood up above it and said, I, Adonai, am the God of your father Abraham, the God of Isaac. The land on which you are lying I will give to you and to your descendants. And your descendants shall be like the dust of the earth, who shall spread out to the west, the east, the north, the south. Through you and your descendants all the families of the earth shall find blessing. And here I am with you. I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this soil. I will not let go of you as long as I have yet to do what I have promised you. Waking from his sleep, Jacob said, Truly Adonai is in this place, and I did not know it. He was awestruck and said, How awe-inspiring is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. We continue silently on 27. arranges the stars in their heavenly courses according to plan. You are creator of day and night, rolling light away from darkness and darkness from night, life, transforming day into night and distinguishing one from the other. Adonai Tzavaot is your name. Ever-living God, may you reign continually over us into eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai, who brings on evening, Baruch atah Adonai, Amen, Amen. In the middle of 33, responsibly. Wisdom and wonder, passion and instruction, story and symbol.
All these things the Lord gives to us.
And the more we devote ourselves to it, the more it grows and gives.
What could be a truer token of your abiding love
Than this holiest of your works and the living language that gives it form. Baruch atah Adonai, Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Blessed is God's glorious majesty forever and ever. Page go out from their midst to freedom for all time. When your children witnessed your dominance, they praised your name in gratitude, and they accepted your sovereignty. Moses, Miriam, and all Israel sang to you together, lifting their voices joyously. Please be seated as we continue on page 54. You set aside the seventh day for your name, the pinnacle of creation, and you blessed above all other days, more sacred than all festival times. So it is written in your Torah, we read together, the heaven and the earth were finished and all their array. On the seventh day, God had completed the work that had been done, ceasing then on the seventh day from all the work that God had done. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, and ceased from all the creative work that God had chosen to do. At the top of page 55. Together, may these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may this day fulfill its promise. Page 57. You are with us in our prayer, our love, our doubts, and our longing to feel your presence and do your will. You are the still, clear voice within us. And therefore, O God, when doubt troubles us and anxiety makes us tremble when pain clouds the mind, we look inward for the answer to our prayers. There may we find you, and there find courage, insight, and endurance. And let our worship bring us closer to one another, that all Israel and all who seek you may find new strength for your service. Baruch atah Adonai, Shabbat Top 59, again together. God of goodness, we give thanks for the gift of life, one way beyond words, for the awareness of soul, our life within, for the world around us so filled with beauty, for the richness of the earth which day by day sustains us. For all these and more we offer thanks. Baruch atah Adonai, L'toshech Adonai. 61. Grant us peace, your most precious gift, O eternal source of peace, and give us the will to proclaim this message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country as a safeguard of peace, its advocate among the nations. May contentment reign within our borders, health and happiness within our homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship and fellowship among all the inhabitants of every land. Plant virtue in every soul, and may the love of your name hallow every home and every heart. Praise are you, eternal one, who blesses our people with peace. Baruch atah Adonai, mefered temel Yisrael Mashallah. turn ahead now to page 253, also turning our thoughts and our hearts to those who are not with us this evening, either because they are unwell or because they're home healing. We include in our prayers continued wishes for Pat Chesley, Judy Foster, add to our prayers Gisela Martin. Are there others whose names you'd like to keep in our thoughts?
Stacy Leonard.
George Goldwater. Lila Gorski and Allison Flood.
Mr. Bear, opportunity to wish you comments about the Hope, Father of God, Hallelujah. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless and heal those who are ill. May the Blessed Holy One be filled with compassion for their health to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit. Let us say, Amen. Two things, among many others, characterize the origins and later development of Judaism. And we see traces of both of these in this week's Torah portion, Acharei Mot Kedoshim. The first was an emphasis on study and learning. There's a reason why we have long been called the people of the book. The Jewish people have, almost from our inception, had a great deal invested in education. While education, until the modern era, was in many other civilizations almost exclusively the preserve of the elite, Judaism esteemed our scholarly class and made the education of all our young something akin to a moral imperative. That emphasis on education has assumed different forms in different places, of course. In America, it is translated into support for public schools and the highest percentage of college degrees among any demographic group. It is reflected in Julius Rosenwald's philanthropic endeavors to build schools for black children in the American South. To some extent, it is also reflected in the attempt to keep religion out of the public schools so that all children would feel included. But all of these merely go to support my point. The second thing characterizing Judaism, especially in its earliest stages, was a campaign to expunge paganism and idolatry. Beginning with Abraham's destruction of his father's idol shop, Judaism has had a zero-tolerance policy for paganism. We see signs of this in the Torah with our disapproval of Egyptian forms of religion and later attacks on Baal worship, but even more so in our later texts such as the Talmud. And with the spread of Christianity and Islam, both the monotheistic products of Judaism, the campaign against paganism very nearly succeeded, thereby transforming Western civilization, at least until now. So sound the alarms. My dear friends, I often like to begin with a joke or some element of humor. Well, this is funny if you appreciate absurdity, but tragic if you appreciate sanity and the value of education. The Board of Education in California recently voted unanimously to approve an ethnic studies model curriculum for use in all of the state's public schools. As several observers have pointed out, this curriculum is probably the most radical, polemical, and ideologically loaded educational document ever offered up for public consideration in the free world. The most astonishing part of the curriculum, at least for our purposes tonight, is the section that deals with religion, or ethnic studies, in an end run around the constitutional issue of religion in the public schools. Students are to be taught that white Christian settlers committed theocide against indigenous tribes when they arrived in the New World by murdering Native American gods and replacing them with the Christian God. According to the curriculum, this replacement ushered in a regime defined by coloniality, dehumanization, and genocide, and the explicit erasure and replacement of holistic indigeneity and humanity. But all is not lost, we are told, for students will learn that they have the power and the responsibility to build a social order defined by counter-genocide, which will eventually supplant the last vestiges of colonial Christianity and pave the way for the regeneration of indigenous epistemic and cultural futurity. Once we get past all the pedagogical jargon, what the curriculum actually does is present the pagan gods of the Aztec Empire as worthy objects of study and veneration. Teachers are encouraged by the authors of the curriculum to lead their students in an ethnic studies community chant, which takes the form of worship offered up to these deities. Forgive my pronunciation here, I'm not up to date on my Aztec gods. The students first clap and chant to the god Tezcatlipoca, whom the Aztecs traditionally worshipped with human sacrifice and cannibalism, asking them for the power to be warriors for social justice. Next, the students chant to the gods Quetzalcoatl, Huitzilopochtli, and Zipitotec, seeking healing epistemologies and a revolutionary spirit. Huitzilopochtli, in particular, is the Aztec deity of war and inspired hundreds of thousands of human sacrifices during Aztec rule. Finally, the chant comes to a climax with a request for liberation, transformation, and decolonization, after which students shout Panche Bay, in pursuit of ultimate critical consciousness. Even a passing knowledge of Aztec history raises serious questions about this ritual. What are the virtues that California's Board of Education thinks is found in the cults of these Mesoamerican deities? The principal place of worship in the Aztec Empire was the Templo Mayor in the city of Tenochtitlan, which was made up of twin pyramids, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun, and the other to Tlaloc, the god of rain. Like all the Aztec gods, Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc had an insatiable appetite for human sacrifice. The priests of Huitzilopochtli would appease their patron deity by laying out a sacrificial victim on a stone at the apex of the god's pyramid, carving out the victim's heart while he or she was still alive, and then rolling the body down the side of the pyramid, at the base of which it was then dismembered and either disposed of or eaten. Post-conquest sources report that the reconsecration of the pyramid in 1487, about 80,400 people were sacrificed in this way over the course of 4 days. Even historians who regard this number as an exaggeration concede that the victim tally was probably still in the tens of thousands. Tlaloc was an even less attractive figure. He had a particular predilection for the sacrifice of children. The remains of more than 40 boys and girls were discovered at the excavation site of the Great Pyramid, most bearing the marks of severe and prolonged torture. This was to be expected, given that the Aztec pictorial codices that have come down to us invariably show the children crying before being sacrificed. The priests of Tlaloc believed the tears of innocent children to be particularly pleasing to the god, and they took great care to ensure that their little victims were crying before and throughout the ceremony, so that the smoke of the sacrificial fire would carry their tears the God above at the moment of death. The ritual began with the bones of the children being broken, their hands or their feet burned, and carvings etched into their flesh. They were then paraded before the celebrants of the ritual while crying. Insufficient tears from the children were believed to result in insufficient rains for the crops that year, so no brutality was spared. And at the end of it all, the mutilated victims were burned alive. Texcatlipoca, who makes an appearance in the New California Catalog of Venerable Deities, was thought to be the most powerful of the Aztec gods. He held sway over darkness, night, sorcery, and witchcraft. He also had it within his power to disrupt the social comity and felicity of the gods themselves, and was, for that reason, particularly to be feared. He was worshipped with many different forms of sacrifice. One of these involved dressing the victim in splendid warrior regalia and tying him to a stake or a wall. Aztec warriors would then battle with him in a mocking and derisive manner, drawing this ritual of humiliation and torture out so as to entertain the god and themselves for as long as possible. These are the deities to whom the Abrahamic God, that would be the same God who condemns child sacrifice in the story of the sacrifice of Isaac, owes theological reparations in the eyes of California's educational establishment. Now, granted that the European colonial powers have much to answer for in their conquest of the indigenous peoples of the New World, but while it was long thought by historians of an anti-colonial bent that the conquistadors greatly exaggerated their accounts of Aztec cruelty for polemical purposes, this is no longer the case. Ample documentary and archaeological evidence now exists showing that the Aztecs were as gratuitously cruel as the Spanish colonists originally reported them to be. The question remains then as to why a cabal of social engineers in California want to present these religious beliefs in a positive light to American children. There are many possible answers to that question. Here is one which seems to sum things up rather succinctly. For those seeking to overhaul the American educational curriculum and give it an anti-racial and social justice orientation, the story of the Aztecs is a simple one. They were a Native American non-Christian people who were conquered by European Christian imperialists. The Aztecs' defeat at the hands of Western civilization, which has had the temerity and the wickedness to outlive their own, thus endows their, dare one say, primitive religious practices with a nobility and a virtue that is entirely undeserved. And it further accords the Aztecs something much sought after in today's social climate, victim status. This in no way exonerates Cortez and his armies, but it should provide us a little greater perspective in a world that is rarely either or. And if it sounds judgmental, I venture to suggest that in this instance, Judaism would have no problem with that. One is tempted to laugh all this off as just one more California eccentricity, and possibly just one more reason people are leaving the state in droves. After all, educational matters are traditionally left to the individual states. Increasingly, however, the federal government is inserting itself into curricular matters through carrot and stick federal grants. And in so many ways, California is often a harbinger of things to come. As a Jew, then, I worry about the kind of education my grandchildren and yours can look forward to. Western religion is on the chopping block, but so too are the classics. They are, racist, as one commentator has written. It was only a matter of time before Cicero got canceled. At a time when Abraham Lincoln doesn't pass muster in the progressive precincts of America, poor benighted Homer, whose chief subject was toxic masculinity, probably doesn't stand a chance. Critics believe that the study of classics has been instrumental to the invention of whiteness and its continued domination, or as a Princeton classics professor himself puts it, systemic racism is foundational to those institutions that incubate classics, and classics as a field itself. The rigors of Greek and Latin, the timeless questions raised by Plato and Aristotle, the literary value of some of the most compelling poems, plays, and tracts ever written, the insights of early historians Herodotus and Thucydides, the oratory of Pericles and Cicero, the awe-inspiring beauty of the architecture, scripture, and pottery, all of this is available to anyone of any race, ethnicity, or creed. To look at these marvels and see only whiteness speaks to a reductive obsession with race that is destructive, self-defeating, and in the end profoundly depressing. There's quite a simple reason, though, that Greece and Rome have been subjects of study and fascination for so long. Their cultural, political, and legal contributions are so vast and enduring. The Greeks gave us the example, flawed and incomplete to be sure, of democracy, and the Roman stamp is still discernible in our legal system and institutions. Of course, the Greeks were blinkered, exclusionary, repressive, and violent, but who wasn't? Where in the ancient world did slavery not exist? What society afforded women equal status with men? Where did any ruler respect the dignity of all people? A key difference between the Greeks and Romans and their neighbors or predecessors was that their writers critiqued and lampooned their own societies. This willingness to engage in self-criticism became one of the hallmarks and strengths of Western culture. Critics of the study of the classics give the Greeks and the Romans the same treatment as the American project, ignoring what was exceptional about them for a maniacal focus on their failings, even if the failings were commonplace everywhere else. They want to impoverish American college students and ultimately the Western mind in an act of ideological destruction. As one person says, this is galling enough, it's even worse that it be called progress. Those thoughts were echoed more recently in a Washington Post op-ed by Cornel West and Jeremy Tate. Frederick Douglass began his great journey of emancipation in the mind. Defying unjust laws he read in secret. Douglass risked mockery, abuse, beating, and even death to study the likes of Socrates, Cato, and Cicero. Long after Douglass's encounters with these ancient thinkers, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. would be similarly galvanized by his reading of the classics as a young seminarian. He mentioned Socrates 3 times in his 1963 letter from Birmingham jail. Yet today, one of America's greatest black institutions, Howard University, is diminishing the light of wisdom and truth that inspired Douglass, King, and countless other freedom fighters. And amid a move for educational prioritization, Howard University is dissolving its classics department. They go on to say, academia's continual campaign to disregard and neglect the classics is a sign of spiritual decay, moral decline, and a deep intellectual narrowness running amok in American culture. Those who commit this terrible act treat Western civilization as either irrelevant and not worthy of prioritization, or as harmful and worthy only of condemnation. Sadly, in our culture's conception, the crimes of the West have become so central that it's hard to keep track of the best of the West. The Western canon is, more than anything, a conversation among great thinkers over generations that grows richer the more we add our own voices and the excellence of voices from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and everywhere else in the world. We should never cancel voices in this conversation, whether that voice is Homer or students at Howard University, for this is no ordinary discussion. The Western canon is an extended dialogue among the creme de la creme of our civilization about the most fundamental questions. It is about asking what kind of creatures are we, no matter what context we find ourselves in. It is about living more intensely, more critically, more compassionately. It is about learning to attend to the things that matter and turning our attention away from what is superficial. Howard University is not removing its classics department in isolation. This is the result of a massive failure across the nation in schooling, which is now nothing more than the acquisition of skills, the acquisition of labels, and the acquisition of jargon. Schooling is not education. Education draws out the uniqueness of people to be all that they can be in the light of their irreducible the maturation and cultivation of spiritually intact and morally equipped human beings. I would only add this to West and Tate's trenchant observations. What is happening at the highest levels of academia will or is already having a trickle-down effect to primary and secondary education as evidenced by the California curriculum. University of Chicago professor Alan Bloom, he was Jewish by the way, addressed the matter as long ago as 1987 in his book, The Closing of the American Mind. But even Bloom probably never imagined this. And if you thought that what happens in California stays in California, then consider the latest reports. The woke revolution in the classroom is about to go federal. In an early but revelatory move, the Department of Education has signaled its intent to impose the most radical forms of critical race theory, in which everything is viewed through a racial racist lens, on America's schools, and very much including the 1619 Project and pet program of the New York Times, in which all of U.S. history is seen as founded on racism, beginning in 1619 with the Jamestown Settlement. The Department of Education has just released the text of a proposed new rule establishing priorities for grants in American history and civics education programs. That rule gives priority to grant projects that incorporate racially, ethnically, culturally, and linguistically diverse perspectives. The rule goes on to cite and praise the New York Times landmark 1619 Project, as well as the work of critical race theorist Kendi, as leading examples of the sort of ideas the administration wants to spread. The program immediately targeted by the new priority criteria for American history and civics grants are small. Once in place, however, those criteria will undoubtedly influence the much larger Civics Secures Democracy Act. That bill would appropriate $1 billion a year for 6 years for history and civics education. Support for Action Civics is already written into the priority criteria in the bill itself. The real danger, of course, is that many school districts will find the grants too tempting to refuse and too easy to become dependent on, even if they come with strings attached. Welcome then to this strange new world of education and the attendant vocabulary: critical race theory, 1619 Project, systemic racism and intersectionality, in which all whites are oppressors and all peoples of color are the oppressed and in coalition with one another, in which nevertheless there is a hierarchy of oppression, in which Jews, now being thought to be white and powerful, are now to be considered the oppressors. It's coming soon to a neighborhood near you. In fact, it may already be here. It's called culturally responsive teaching, an ultra-woke and utterly politicized pedagogy derived from critical race theory that was recently imposed on teachers in Illinois. My dear friends, this is the world and the form of education our grandchildren and grandchildren will inherit. And if not our own grandchildren, then certainly the next generation, which will eventually assume the reins of leadership. And while I don't wish to sound like I'm fear-mongering, still I confess that I tremble. I tremble because it puts the ignorant in the vanguard. I tremble because the increasing parallels to Mao's cultural revolution are inescapable. No, we don't have deaths and torture and internment camps for people to scream at night. But the program of re-education, the campaign of misinformation, the intimidation and hostility from some quarters directed at those who oppose or resist or simply speak their minds, efforts to rewrite history and tell a wholly different American story, a news media that seeks to tell a narrative rather than report facts, a social media that has the power to shape and select the information to which we have access. These are dangerous trends that do not bode well for the future. I tremble because Jews, whomever we march with, do not fare well when caught in the crosshairs of revolution, and because the Jacobins eventually end up devouring their own. But mostly I tremble because it truly bespeaks the closing of the mind and the silencing of an open society. Our quest for social justice is become an obsession with race that is blinding us to what we share and what the classics strive to point out. That life is more than gender and skin color. It is about our human condition and human error, our joys and sorrows, our strengths and weaknesses, our successes and failures, our yearnings and our willingness to try to realize them together. We Jews have always been advocates for education, and we've always resisted idolatry. I was on a webinar 2 days ago with Jonathan Tobin, who was discussing the growing gulf between American Jews and Israel, born of the differences between America's Jews and our Israeli co-religionists. Though he said it in a different context, one comment stood out to me. It has always been the Jewish way to stand up and resist the idols of popular culture. It takes courage to stand up and be a Jew when it isn't popular, but it starts by speaking up. As the old public service announcement once had it, a mind is a terrible thing to waste. If ever there were a time for speaking up, it is now. Kani Hiratso, may it be God's will. Second. And on that cheery and challenging note, we return to our books, pages 4 and 5, as we join together in Kiddush. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzah Shabbat Kadshav Yahweh Ratzon Yichilanu Zikaron L'Maaseh Bereishit Kihu Yom Tefillah L'Mikrei Kodesh Zecher Tziyat Mitzrayim Kivanu B'Charta Yotanu Kidashta Mikol Page 282, please stand down. Let the time not be distant, O God, but also turn to in love. When corruption and evil shall give way to integrity and goodness, when superstition shall no longer enslave the mind, nor idolatry blind the eye. So may all created in your image become one in spirit, one in friendship, forever united in your service. Then shall your realm be established on earth, and the word of your prophet fulfilled. Adonai will reign forever and ever.
Thank you.
place at this season of the year. Zikronam Uracha. May their memories be for blessings. Together we now stand for Mourner's Cottage, page 294. Yikidal Yikidash Mirama, Yomad Yuraf Yurte, Yamith Malkute, Bachayikon, Yomekon, Chaye, Yehovah Israel, Ba'agalah, Gizman Karibu Roni, Yehei Shemei Rabban Baraf, Delamo Minamaya, Yidbaraf, Yishtabach, Yidbar, Yidamah, Yidmaseh, Yidhadar, Yidaleh, Yidalal, Shemei, Yudhishaber, Yihu, Le'elam, Minko, Birchata, Bashirata, Tushbechata, Menechamata, Damiran, Yolam, and Rami, Yehei Shlama, Rabban, Shemaya, Chaim, Aleinu, Yaakov, Israel, Rami. Oseh Shalom, B'Ramah, Uyaseh Shalom, Aleinu, Yaakov, Israel, Rami. May the source of peace and peace to those who mourn, comfort to all who grieve among us, as we say.
Amen.
Please be seated. Our closing song. Before we conclude with Baha'i and Angel on 346, just a reminder of upcoming events. There's a technical board meeting this coming Tuesday. Services next Friday evening. Next Saturday, we'll have our monthly Zoom schmooze, and then on Sunday we will meet in the morning again via Zoom for the annual temple meeting and election of the board of trustees. Following week, the Sister Shabbat will be doing an installation of both the sisterhood and temple boards, and then it's on to Mother's Day. So, page 346, Baha'i.
Shabbat shalom.